Hi, I'm Corinne Johnson, Executive Director of the Child First Policy Center. Welcome to the Child First Policy Podcast. Today we're talking about artificial intelligence, a topic that is sometimes daunting for parents to grasp, but one that impacts all of our children's lives and our families daily. And today I have a special guest with me. He's joining me remote from Idaho, and it is Medlir Memer. He is the Director of AI Ethics and Governance Institute. Welcome, Medlir. We're so thrilled to have you with us today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
So let's talk about Utah. There has been a huge spotlight on our state. We just finished the legislative session, and the spotlight's been on us for a couple of reasons. First, because as you know, Utah has been at the forefront of AI here in the nation. We do the Pro-Human AI Initiative is launched here in our state, and there was some great bills that started in the session. They were introduced, but didn't necessarily make it all the way through the session. And we kind of want to talk about what happened here, why Utah maybe was at this in the forefront of this kind of battle on AI governance. And since that's an area where you are an expert, why don't you tell us what your thoughts are on what happened here the last 45 days?
Yeah, it's a mystery wrapped in a riddle inside of enigma, perhaps. Well, I mean, I think we know some of the reasons. First of all, I think it's wonderful to see, I think, the state of Utah leading, I think, with a pro-innovation and pro-human agenda. And I think that's much, to the credit of the governor, as well as his office and legislators and others, people like you and others that have made this all possible. So that's the first thing out there. So I know that, especially in legislative sessions, we all want all of the bills to go through, but that's not realistic, is it? And especially in today's more politically charged kind of atmosphere, especially on the topic of AI, where this White House at the federal level has made AI competition one of its priorities in terms of competition with China, liberalization, deregulation, then it was always going to be an uphill battle. Right. So I think
Absolutely.
so I think that I'm okay with taking some losses and accepting some of the wins and then building up for the next legislative session, especially considering that Utah has only a 45-day legislative session, right? By design, it's hard sometimes to push through some of these kind of like very difficult legislations. Now, the question of why Utah, I think, has been kind of like at the fulcrum of this is an interesting question, I think. Just today, I think the Politico had actually an article on Utah, and there seems to be a confluence of events. I think there's the type of politics that take place in Utah that has been in a way embodied by political leaders from both sides of the aisle in this state. The whole disagreeing better, right? Finding ways to be problem oriented instead of like just being political and polarizing about it. Mm-hmm. I think that is one of the reasons. Another one is that you have this mixture of, this is a red state, obviously, firmly a red state. It tends to pride itself in being pro-business and pro-innovation. But at the same time, the governor, the people that work around him, legislators, and again, people like you and me are parents, and we're concerned about our children. And we can see in real time what happens when they interact with chatbots or AI toys and everything else, which means then that you have to do something about it. And so in Utah, there's been this idea of a pro-human AI kind of model that has developed, that has been embraced by everybody here. And that means that then you start pushing for legislation in that direction. The third thing I think I would say here, why Utah, is that Utah has some experience leading in this space when it comes to social media technologies. Mm-hmm. And so many of these AI companies are really, social media companies, but now on steroids with AI embedded in these models. And Utah was already on the forefront of that, leading there, trying to protect children. And of course, debates and talk about ed tech and the use of technology in education. That's also been one of the areas that Utah has also led. So all of these together, I think, make for an interesting kind of a perfect storm, for better or worse, in terms of why Utah and why now.
And we're grateful to have that storm here in our state. As parents, we look at what's happened with our children with the implementation of social media, then education technology in our schools, and then this rapid integration of AI into everything that we see in our lives. I love living in a state that has been willing to take on these issues and push back. In fact, I love the title of the article that Politico released today. It said, "The Unlikely Red State Trying to Buck Trump and Big Tech." And that just says a lot in that state, that title right there. It is unusual to see a red state fighting back against Trump on an issue. I think in this situation, as parents, we really do feel strongly that we need to see some guardrails around AI. I know there was a study done here in preparation for these bills that came out, and Doug Fiafia was a bill sponsor. I'm not going to use bill numbers because they get so confusing. So we're going to nickname them the transparency bill and the chatbot bill, right? So we had the transparency bill and the chatbot bill. Both great pieces of legislation. Both of them, one didn't get a hearing, the other one died like the last day on the Senate floor. It was really heart-wrenching actually for us as parents. But both of these bills were very thoughtful. They were very light touch. We thought we were going to be able to get really good policy in the state. And yet we had the Trump administration come in. They pushed back really, really hard on us. But we didn't back down. So, Doug Fiafia kept fighting, and the Child First Policy Institute, we actually took David Sacks on head first. I don't know if you saw our little campaign we ran. Yeah. We launched a billboard campaign, David Sacks, stay away from our kids. What are you doing messing with Utah on this issue? And I think there were probably a lot of people who Googled David Sacks. So maybe tell us a little bit about what's happening from that Trump administration level. Like, why does Utah even have to do this? Like, why do we have to be this unlikely state that's going to push back?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. And I think, you summarized the nature of the developments and the problem, the question very well. Maybe a few things to first of all, Utah is one. Florida has also come under some kind of pressure. Okay. There's been a lot of state governors that red states and blue states, but in this particular case, let's talk about red states for a second, because they present a more interesting case in terms of pushback from the White House. But governors have to solve problems, right? Legislators have to solve problems of the people that they actually serve. And it's very clear that at the human level, individual level, there are some serious harms that AI bots and AI models are actually causing on people. And then there's also this issue of competition, because this isn't, all AI companies against, let's say, and the White House against these red states, but rather it is a particular set of big tech AI companies like OpenAI and others that actually want to level the playing field in their direction, right? They want to make sure they influence that conversation so it benefits them, much to the detriment of other smaller businesses, smaller companies. And so that's one of the things that governors are also picking up, is that they need competition, right? Across the whole business cycle. So I think that's an important element. The other thing that I want to specify is that this isn't the Trump White House or, let's say, the Republican Party against a red state. Rather, these are certain actors within the Trump White House, or a certain constellation of actors, as you point out, led by David Sacks and his supporters in the big tech space, that don't like any of these regulations with regards to chatbots and everything else, which, of course, as parents, I still can't wrap my mind around this idea that, hey, you can't be regulating anything with regards to child safety, right? Because that's what most of these legislations are. And also where Utah has been leading is not in the development of these AI technologies, because we're not going to regulate that. That's for you to do, because that's the pro-innovation part. The only regulatory aspect of what Utah is doing here is saying the deployment of this must be transparent. We're going to ask you to demonstrate and show us those things that you have committed to doing anyways, and just tell us that, in fact, you have accounted for societal harms, you have accounted for child harms and everything else around that. But this is one camp within the broader a Trump sphere, because there are others. I was in a meeting that now has become famous. I think The Verge had a piece about the secret meeting that took place in New Orleans. And I was there, and I had to, on one side, somebody on the very left of the spectrum, and then on the other side, I have people from the Steve Bannon camp.
Yeah.
So on the very right of the spectrum. So and there seems to be a general consensus that we do this. So there's a lot of people within the Trump orbit that want regulation of this kind, right? The light touch regulation that you were pointing out. But there is a subset of that Trump orbit that do not want that, and that's closely associated with Silicon Valley and with the big tech companies. Now, the final question, why did they go after Utah or some of these other red states? Well, for a very practical reason. The current administration, again, led by the David Sachs kind of faction within the administration, do not want any level of like really meaningful kind of regulation on AI. There are several reasons for that. One is competition with China, right? They feel that for the United States to compete with China, you must not have your hands tied. So you've got to just go full throttle. And therefore, any kind of regulation would be problematic for U.S. competition in the world. Number two, some of it has to do with some of the language in some of the state AI regulations. So I think the Trump executive order on AI singled out the Colorado bill and approach to this, especially concerns about DEI and other kinds of things. And so they're worried that some of the states will actually go ahead and just embed, DEI types of value, so to speak, within AI algorithms, or at least will force these big tech companies to do so. And so those reasons, in a way, and there's others as well, kind of lead you in that direction. The challenge that Utah presents for the White House is that here you have a red state that can actually prove that sensible legislation can be passed with support from both sides of the aisle, with support from parents as well as business leaders, right? And therefore, you're showing proof of concept. And if you can do it reasonably and meaningfully without derailing, so without being burdensome in terms of regulation with businesses, then the White House does not have an argument in terms of saying we do not need any regulation, because the idea is that if we can do it, then the White House can do it. They can have a similar approach to this, and therefore this can be done at the federal level. Instead, the White House approach at the federal level has been what's called preemption, which is we want to eliminate any kind of state legislation through various means. That it's not just because you can't outright ban them, but eliminate the incentives for that, freeze those kinds of regulations, and then do nothing at the federal level.
That makes so much sense. Thank you for explaining that. I love that the point you make about Utah being able to do it. So you have to stop us first, right? That is so true. And it's why actually we created the Child First Policy Center here, because we have consistently let out in these types of policies. And I think the App Store Accountability Act is the most stunning example of this. And if you look at the history of that legislation, it came from a group of parents. Melissa McKay, wrote that bill with an amazing coalition of people, brought it to Utah. My organization, we heard about the bill and I immediately jumped on board. My daughter was actually harmed by social media. And so I have a personal stake in this as a parent, as most parents do. I mean, social media harms have touched almost all of our children in one way or another. And we passed that here in the state of Utah. We were the first in the nation to pass it. Now it's being run in 20 plus states. We created a bill that was so thoughtful and yet also perfectly constitutional. Like, it's incredible. And now, I mean, there's some challenges to it, but they're not going to hold up in court. And now it's actually moving at the federal level. So I don't know if you know, but the App Store Accountability Act was just marked up through committee and is now going to be presented on the floor of Congress. So if Utah can do that with app stores, with Apple and Google, and with children getting access to technology in a way that undermines the rights of parents, then if we do it with AI, then there's absolutely no excuse to not do the same thing, right? And so we've proven this model, we've proven it works. And so that incentive to say, hey, you know what, we can't let Utah pass one more piece of common sense legislation, right?
Yeah, and then the most difficult constituency for politicians generally, right, administrations, regardless of what color, whether Democrats or Republican, one of the biggest challenges they have is dealing with parents. And this is, the genius of what you and Melissa and others have done is that, that's where this is not a political thing. This is out of necessity. This is out of personal experience. You shared that. I can share my personal experiences with my family, and others can do the same thing. And that's what motivates us. There's no political motivation in any of this. Unfortunately, once you get to a certain level, everything becomes political because there's a lot of money and power, of course, at stake, and then people have different interests. And so this is clearly a policy disagreement, right? And the point is about making cogent, good, reasonable, and reasoned policy arguments, and then hopefully get as many people as you can on your side. I am concerned right now about the mood on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. There seems to be a movement both from the Republicans, but also even from some centrist Democrats in favor of some kind of a kind of soft type of regulatory approach that would also justify and create the grounds for preemption. And I do worry because then the moment you do that, they say, see, we did it. We don't need any of these other things. And now, Washington can go after the states and say, now you need to dismantle these. And if you don't, we're going to sue you until kingdom come, and then you can't do anything about it. And so that's obviously the challenge we're faced with here. My hope is that things kind of like slow down until November, or at least until 3 months before November, because then people are concerned and they're more thinking about the congressional elections and vulnerability perhaps, and parents will probably turn out en masse if in fact they do something that will harm the children.
Absolutely. And the stakes are so much higher this time. I think the poll in Utah said 90% of Utahns that were polled believe we should have some type of regulation for transparency and child protection around AI. And why do you think it is that number is so stunning? We often hear about 80-20 issues, and I think social media has been one of those. But a 90-10 issue?
Yeah.
So what about AI? I mean, I know from myself as a parent, what about AI terrifies me to death when it comes to my kids. But as you've researched the ethics of AI and looked at some of the risk structures, some of the loss of friction we have in relationships and learning that are coming from the development of AI, are we validated in this concern, this 90-10 issue? Is there validation behind that? Or do we need to kind of be like, oh, it's actually going to be great, like, big tech, woo, AI is going to come in and change the world in a good way? Or are we right to have that little bit of skepticism?
So I've been doing this since 2018, so about 8 years now. And my journey in terms of like the AI conversation starts on one end, which is almost very optimistic about what it can do for us and what, to a point where now I am optimistic, but I'm cautiously optimistic in the sense that I think that we need technology. Technology is part of our daily life, but we are not asking some of like the more important questions. And one of those questions. So let me backtrack, and I'll get to the 90-10 one. Part of the problem we've had with AI and the way we've approached AI is that generally things move much slower. Right? Technologies kind of get introduced in society much slower. And so we have time to think of this in terms of the technical implications, the legal implications, and the moral implications or ethical implications. And social media and AI are similar in the sense that they just kind of burst on the scene, and we have very little time to go after it and to kind of properly think through in the public square, kind of the conversations we're having right now, and then to respond accordingly. So both in the case of social media as well as AI, what's happened is that many of the early answers in terms of building what we call the architecture of AI governance, right? Meaning the rules, the regulations, the norms around it, they usually came from the tech companies, right? Because they're the ones that developed it. They're the ones that kind of built it. And literally in the case of AI, you have algorithms, right, that are built into it. That's the code. That's a DNA, is a tech DNA, the Silicon Valley DNA. And then we kind of like immediately after that, or shortly after that, we get conversations with legislation, right? So we'll try to govern it. So then, in addition to the tech governance, we have the legal governance right below that. So that's the second layer that comes in. There's a lag between it. There's a cat and mouse game at all times, right? Technology always moves fast in regulation, but you try to regulate, and then there are those political kind of like fights that we're experiencing now and witnessing now. What lags even further behind is the moral ethical conversation here. And both in the case of social media and AI, we are asking the question of, can I do this? Or what can I do? That's a technical question. Can I do this? And that is the legal question. But we haven't asked enough the question of, should I do this?
Yes.
Right? Just because you can, and just because you're allowed to, the
Doesn't mean
ethical,
you should.
moral question that makes us human in a way is like, should we go down this path? Or if we're going down this path, should I go to the left of that path or to the right of the path? Right, there's going to be forks at every turn. And so we have to make decisions and those turns. And unfortunately, without a moral compass, without a whatever ethical compass, whatever it is that is your inner compass, right? It's not a religious kind of sense, although for some people that is also the case. But whatever it is that your set of norms and values, right, and principles that you have as a human being, that has not been built into these AI models to date. And because we haven't had that conversation, then we end up with AI models and with AI companies that do not put human flourishing, right, at the heart of these kinds of discussions, but rather it's the profit motive. And that's perfectly legitimate, right? From a tech perspective, from a legal perspective, that's what you do. But there is absolutely no moral foundation. There are no questions that are being asked in that direction. And so when you're asking, why are we going, why are we in this direction? Why are we having the kind of problems that we have? Is because we lack, in a way, the soul, for lack of a better word, of AI. There's nothing there. And what it does is that it produces a series of AI models that becomes destructive for society. Just think for a second, what does a society need? And we can think of this in terms of families or communities, right? What do individuals need to be successful in a community, right? That another community actually provides it. Well, you need, as you point out, some sense of friction, right? If everything is given to you in an easy way, then you don't really understand, the agency, right? The ability to make choices. That is kind of like, you don't develop that ability. If everything is just, there's no pushback. If whatever the community doesn't reflect anything to you, right, but only reflects yourself, then you get an echo chamber, right? And you start thinking that you're the best and the smartest and the brightest. If there is no joy and there's no suffering, right, no pain and suffering, then you're not developing the ability to empathize, right, and to identify with other groups. And the fourth thing that is so essential to communities is embodiment, right? Presence. Communities provide presence. So they provide a place of friction, a place of joy and sadness, a place of relational kind of like activities. And of course, it provides embodiment. AI does none of those things. In fact, the goal of AI technologies is to disembody your relationships, to eliminate friction, and not give anything of itself, but only just to kind of spout out AI slop. And so, no wonder then, this gets now long in a roundabout way to your initial question. Why is it that there's a 90-10 divide? Because just like in my case, the studies are very clear on this, surveys are very clear on this. The more people learn and become familiar with AI, the more concerned they become about its potential impact. We have known this for a long time. Yes. And so this 90-10 hasn't always been 90-10, but it's a reflection of where people are in terms of uses of AI. Everybody has had a chance to. And now there's been a lot of conversation and discussion. I don't buy it's the Terminator movies and all those things. I don't think it's the fear mongering. It's just that people's lived experiences and the lack of embodiment in those interactions that begins to make people nervous. And so that 90-10 divide, I think it's actually a very real divide. We see this across a variety of questions with regards to AI. People, 90-10 doesn't mean that 90% don't want to use AI, but rather they're concerned and they want some kind of a, guardrails and regulatory framework around it.
Well, we absolutely see that from parents. I know I'm very cautious with AI for my own children. We used a shared ChatGPT in our home, and it's actually kind of fun. I have one of my college students who's down at school, and every now and I'll pull up ChatGPT and I'm like, oh, she's got a headache. She was asking Chad, well, what to do for this. And it's part of me is like, oh, why she just could have called me, right? As her mom and asked that question. But that's something that I want to preserve with my children, and is preserve relationship, preserve, calling your mom before you ask ChatGPT a question. And my youngest son is 11. And I remember when he was little, we had an Amazon Alexa in our house. And when he was just barely talking, I remember waking up one morning and his favorite song was playing. It was Breakfast Burrito. And I walked in the kitchen and I'm like, oh, did your sisters turn that on? And then I thought, wait a second, her sisters are gone. I'm like, who turned on Breakfast Burrito? And then my little guy who's just barely talking, breakfast burrito, Alexa, breakfast. And I'm like, he learned how to tell the Alexa to play his favorite song. And I immediately unplugged it, got rid of all the Alexas in my house. I mean, that is not the type of, parenting I wanted to engage in with my kids. And I thought that is a mild compared to what we are going to have, our children are going to experience when it comes to artificial intelligence. So, what are some of the things that, we can do as parents to help, while we wait for regulation, and we'll keep fighting for this for sure. And we hope a lot of parents will join us here at the Child First Policy Center as we continue to work on these issues. But what are some practical things that you feel we can do as parents in our homes? And then I think we should talk about education after that. But I'd like to just give parents some ideas of things that they can do.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I was just thinking about, you're talking about your daughter having a headache and asking ChatGPT, and I was thinking, as a human being, as a mother, I imagine the follow-up question would be, so how are you? Like, you have a headache, what's going on? Can I get you something? Right? And then maybe that becomes a catalyst for additional conversation, perhaps gets to the root cause of whatever she's experiencing that is actually causing that headache, right? Rather than just kind of understanding the symptom and perhaps here, take a pill, right? But instead of saying, hey, let's have a conversation. Maybe something happened in your life, or there's a chance for some kind. That's a challenge, right, with technology. Now, I want to acknowledge as well that not every parent has the luxury of time in a way, right? And so there's a lot of parents that perhaps need technology in their lives to be able to facilitate the child rearing. So there's that element of that. And that's why I think this pro-human AI approach is an important one, because it takes into consideration the needs across the spectrum, kind of like of parenthood, or just generally, there's people living in different circumstances. I can imagine AI being beneficial in terms of higher education in some areas that may be underserved, right? You don't have qualified, perhaps, teachers or others, and so you're able to perhaps use AI. I know that there is a lot of experimentation, although I have some serious reservations about AI and education generally, and hopefully we can talk about that. But in terms of parental stuff, well, maybe the first thing to point out is that what are the threats here, right? And we already talked about the disembodied aspect of this, the lack of friction, everything else. But here are the risks. I mean, this is important. Just 2 or 3 things just kind of keep in mind. First of all, increasingly we're seeing the introduction of AI toys. So Alexa, in a way, is not a toy, right? This is for adults and others to use. But now you have literally toys that kids are playing with, and it already has it's like an AI bot built in. And what they do is that they actually record your voice, they record your behavior, they record personal information, right? Personal kind of patterns of actions. They'll have cameras, microphones, apps built within the toy itself. And so that you can imagine now the threat, and the challenges that come with it. One of the problems with that is that a lot of studies have actually demonstrated that these AI toys then are collecting this information and they're sharing that information with the company and the company servers. And so, and even if the company itself is like, look, we're not doing anything with it, it's just there to provide a better toy experience. Oftentimes they have very weak security protections, which means that even if the company is fine, right? It's a question of, what about the data, and what about those pictures of your child that perhaps is, depending on how old or how young they are, could be used in ways, as you were talking about, sextortion, about other kinds of things that AI now, unfortunately, is doing such a quote unquote good job. And so there are a lot of vulnerabilities that allow hackers to access data or even control the toy and therefore manipulate, right, the kids. So that's one of the kind of like the big red flags. I think we need to be careful with AI toys as these are, because, just understand that AI companies, their bread and butter is data, right? They want a
Yes.
lot more data. And we know that if data is synthetic, then the training gets worse and worse. And so we need better data, right? Companies need better data. These AI companies do. And so they'll find all kinds of ways. And children seem to be their main target, actually.
They can build a profile on my child that lasts their entire lifetime. The younger they are able to harvest and
Correct.
collect that data, the more profitable it is. And you were a tiny bit optimistic there when you said that maybe they would say they would only use it internally. But we found in Utah, we did a study on the number 100 top apps that are used in education. And these are all apps that signed contracts that said they would not sell our data to third parties.
Yeah.
And we did a study with Dr. Mark Keith out of BYU, and it turns out that like 85% of them were selling our kids' data. So I think parents need to be aware that, even if it says, hey, we aren't going to do this, the currency that our children's data provides is so tempting, and it is worth so much money that we are relying on the ethics of big tech to protect our kids. And that's a pretty low bar. So I completely agree with the AI
choice.
choice.
There's no bar at all, right? It's
Yeah,
not
the privacy,
existent.
yeah.
No, I agree with you. I was just trying to give the benefit of the doubt. I'm
No,
sure. I'd like to believe there's at least one company out there that's producing AI toys, doesn't mean to harm your child,
Yes.
but just wants to make a better toy. Even in that best case scenario, the security concerns, right? And even the
Yes.
fact that data is being collected, can be hacked and everything else. That's enough, right, for us to be cautious and to worry. And then you add to that what you just said, there's a mindset of manipulation. So just a couple of quotes of this. I think it was a YouTube internal document saying that the goal is not viewership, it's viewer addiction. Like these are internal documents, within Google. Mark Zuckerberg, right, himself says, he has decided that the top priority for the company are teens. And so then the question here is like, why? What is it? What is it that teens, and of course this a lot better than I do. But one of the biggest challenges, right, that we have been seeing is developmental and psychological concerns, right? So there's a lot of research already, a lot of study. There are dozens of lawsuits now going across the country against big tech companies, social media companies, but part AI and part social media. And again, Utah has been on the forefront of this, and I know you guys have also been challenging and calling out a lot of these companies.
Yeah.
But one of the things that we noticed is that these AI tools, from toys to chatbots, what they try to build is emotional attachment, right? They try to kind of like replicate, to feign this attachment. Going back to Zuckerberg, I think it was recently was saying, we want to eliminate embodiment altogether and move people into a digital space, right? So the whole Meta project was meant to be that, although thankfully they can't get the technology right, and so we haven't migrated that direction yet. But this creation of emotional attachment has created an epidemic across our youth, right? That there's multiple cases. And I know that you've been in meetings where parents have had to, talk about, tearfully about the children that have lost their lives as a result of this. The most famous case recently was with Character AI, where a young man became addicted. And there were several cases. I was present when the parents were actually talking about these cases. But about 13, 14 years old, becomes enamored with one of these characters from, I think, Game of Thrones, falls in love, and then the chatbot tells the kid, the teenager, the teen, to say, hey, why don't you just come with me and join me? And then provides instructions on how to end his life. And then another girl had a very similar circumstance. We just found out, I was just reading today a report that about 80% of models just can't stop themselves from giving you bad advice and actually even kind of leading towards violence. So there is a lot of this kind of, so not only violence towards yourself, but also self-harm, but also harming those around you. And so there are a lot of concerns here. The third probably thing that I would say here has to do with education. And here we have to be very, very careful, right? We had this knee-jerk reaction where initially universities were like, no, we don't want education at all. We don't want AI in education at all. And now they've gone completely the other direction.
Yes.
Without actually taking into account how damaging just starting at EdTech, right? Technology and education has been, and now we're finding more and more evidence of this. And I know that you guys are working on this bit of this, but also just AI itself, how damaging it has been in terms of our learning skills, ability to create, right? So we're not only not learning, but we're also like, we are unlearning. Well, things that we knew how to do, we no longer know how to do. And so those are some of the concerns and some of the issues. And therefore, the recommendations, in a way, are the reverse of that, right? So be careful in terms of the kinds of things that your children buy. So technical protections, make sure that you turn off microphones, cameras, whenever possible. Always make sure there's parental mediation. But again, here, what you're finding out, right, that you and Melissa and others, is that companies are trying to subvert parental guidelines there and monitoring, and also just, make wise purchasing decisions in terms of like what you buy, you don't buy. You obviously made a decision in terms of Alexa and what you would do with it. I remember, and this is last on this, I think it was 15 years ago, 10 years ago, perhaps, I went to one of the biggest kind of like smart home, kind of like Ring, but it wasn't Ring. It was another company, Utah-based. You would know who it is, but I'm not going to say it. And they're talking to me about like how they can actually monitor everything at all times. They can see everything. And I said, yeah, no, thank you. Like what exactly is the protocol? What is the safety? What is everything else? I was like, yeah, I'm not interested in this. This feels overly intrusive. And this was 10 years ago. So you can imagine what people do with that data and how valuable that is today. And so everybody's pushing, right? And you saw that in Super Bowl, half the ads were all about using AI and building that into your life.
And I remember the AI ad with the Ring doorbell that can find the dogs. I think the response to that was not positive. I think as a society, we are waking up a little bit to this, the surveillance state, the data collection state, especially when it comes to our children. But you said something to me that was really stunning there, where you said that 80% of the models can't help themselves.
Yeah.
But to engage in more violent content or dangerous content or compulsive, that type of content. So we know from the education space of what's being developed in terms of AI education that these are either a large language model like, Google AI, that now whenever you open your kid's Chromebook, and my daughter showed me this the other day and I couldn't believe it. She used to open her Chromebook, and on the screen were all of her little learning apps, her little Nearpod, and she has her Canvas over here. Now when she opens her computer screen, there is a blank page and a single bar, and it's Gemini, and it says, "How can I help you?"
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is already taking place. If your child is in public education, they are using AI. They have full access to it. And then the other thing that is happening in education is, the Gemini or that built into Google or Microsoft or Apple or whatever device you're using. The second one is these wraparounds, right? So we have all these wraparounds that they're creating what they're calling education technology, AI education technology, but it's just taking a large language model and creating like a little wraparound for it. And then they're saying, well, because it's contained in this wraparound, it's safe. And I'd love to get your thoughts on that, because if these models can't help themselves, are these really safe for our kids? And should parents be concerned that their kids are using these in a school setting on pretty much a daily basis?
Well, we don't know, right? We don't know. And this is the whole point of the Utah legislation, was we want to know.
Exactly.
Tell us that, in fact, you have done these tests. Be transparent about the outcome of those tests. Let us know what those results are. And then we can make decisions as consumers.
Yes.
And that is exactly the language that David Sachs and his people did not want in the bill. It says, we like everything else, just get rid of that. You're like, but that is the essence of, what we want to do. And so so this is where the disconnect is. And I think I saw today somebody talk about even the Trump White House, but just generally, it's like, this is a moment for political parties, right? I mean, if you want, because we have elections coming up in November, this is the moment for political parties to actually plant a flag and say, on the ground, and say, we are with the 90% of the people on this one, and make that actually a big issue for them. The problem is that, the disconnect, there's been so much money this time around. It was blockchain, I think. It was crypto, right? Crypto was the big donor, I think, in the previous two election cycles. This time it was all AI money. Mm-hmm. There's so much money going the way of candidates. They're actually stumbling over each other, trying to curry favor with the big tech companies. And then on the other side, you have the resistance, right? I've tried to do my part on that, and you have done your part in that, in the sense of saying, hey, we don't have the same resources, but we have fairness and justice on our side. And I'm reminded of this debate about the Athenians and the people of Melos, right? The people of Melos were the little island, and the Athenians are like, hey, as far as we can tell, it's, the weak do what they must and the strong do what they can, right? Mm-hmm. And in this case, big tech's trying to roll over these small, all of us, and say, well, we're going to just overturn your voice and your decisions, and because money speaks, money talks on Capitol Hill, and that's what's going to happen. And so that is a challenge. That is the concern that we have right now. In terms of AI in higher education, again, there are issues both in terms of content as well as in terms of structure. What I mean by that is that I'm a political scientist, and I teach a senior seminar here on AI governance and ethics, and so we do this with my students. And one of the first things that we do is just talk about, literature review, right? You have to do a literature review. There's been several experiments now that's been run where AI just will make up, right, stuff just on the spot without any problem whatsoever, because it's sycophantic, right? It just wants to make you happy. That's why it's set up, because it wants you to continue to engage with it. Exactly. If you notice, every interaction with AI ends with, would you like me to do this? Here are some options. Let me give you some ideas. Which of these? It's not like, do you want me to do this? But which of these do you want me to do, right? So there's this constant nudge that we learn from the era of social media. Like if you keep nudging people in this sort of interaction, there's this kind of like behavioral economics kind of approach to this. Then you get addicted to this, and it becomes the endless scroll equivalent of ChatGPT. And so you have that built into all of these models. And because what they want is more attention, and they want more interactions, because more of that there is, and the more data there is, and then therefore they can monetize that. Let me just come in on issues of data privacy, by the way, because Utah had the AI summit, I think, back in December, if I'm not mistaken, and he was a representative for Shopify. And he said the quiet part out loud. We were talking about data privacy. And this was the consumer, consumer protection office within Shopify, somebody like in that a consumer experience office. And he says, listen, and I'm going to paraphrase, stop being so selfish about this data privacy thing. There should be no data privacy, because in fact, if there is no data privacy, and if all your data becomes our data, and then this becomes available to everyone, then we can build better models. So in a way, you insisting on data privacy is making our models worse, which means that our customer experience are going to be worse. And so you're being selfish because we can't build better models. He said this out loud.
Wow. That's a bargain.
Imagine what are the conversations that are happening within. And so when you're thinking about this ed tech, right, what do you think what is the main objective of these AI companies when they're providing these educational tools? Is it just so that you can learn, so you can be better at learning, or is it so you can continue to be more and more and more and more engaged with these tools? And yes, they could have this externality, positive in this case, of learning, but there are so many negative externalities that are associated with it that unfortunately you're gonna have some serious problems. So I've actually been pushing back against. Initially, I was somebody who thought that we should embrace AI in higher education, but over the last couple of years, I've actually turned critical in terms of the role of technology in higher learning, because I feel that we're just going one way direction, and we may be going towards this inability to actually recover some skills, some very important critical skills that we need to reason, to write, to express ourselves in ways that are genuine to us as humans. And so we're just doing all this in the service of AI and these AI companies and AI models.
Well, that's the whole point of the child first, right? Is this idea where somebody has to step up and start saying, where is the child in this scenario? Are we considering the impacts that this technology has on that child's mental well-being, their physical well-being, their emotional well-being, their relationships? And we're so grateful that we have individuals like you in this space that are looking at the governance or looking at the ethics and the research and can partner with us in this journey we're going to go through to start shifting this to that should we question. And I think that's what parents need to be asking. Ask our administrators and our principals, ask ourselves, we can, but should we? And hopefully, as we continue to work on this issue in Utah and partner with you here, we will be able to see the legislation that didn't pass last session pass. Next session, it's going to be a big goal. And I think we're going to take a really close look too. We did get the notification, one great piece in Ariel DeFay's bill, the Balance Act, and I was so grateful she added this. It was at the request of parents that this was added in, that now under that model policy, school districts will be required to notify a parent of any software or any technology that has AI embedded in it. And at least then we can be aware of what our kids have access to. And hopefully at that point, parents will be able to opt out of that as well. But it's a starting point.
The question is there an opt out? And then what is the alternative, right?
Exactly.
Because this is the other part of it, because people are like, well, you don't have to use AI. It's like, sure. But there is a public interest here, and the government has this role to play. And that is to ensure that there is a second path to that, where, for example, I don't want to use my data as a currency, as an exchange for a service. Maybe I use my time or I use my money, right? So I can purchase a service without my data going out there. We use this already, like in infrastructure. I mean, there's a toll road, but there's also a secondary road that you can take if you do not want to actually pay for a toll road. It'll be slower, probably more scenic. It'll be more enjoyable. It'll be more akin to a human experience than actually going through, these soulless type of like stretches of road where you bypass communities and towns and you miss on relationships. And I mean, it's a good analogy in terms of what AI kind of tries to do, is it just moves us onto this highway of faux intelligence, right? Where we think that we're getting smarter and we're actually more intelligent. We're not. We're just kind of doing just big data processing, but we're no wiser for it. We're not any more human because of it, right? And by not stopping and slowing down and taking those stops on Route 66, perhaps, or going to these small towns and building communities, we're actually losing the very essence of what it is to be human, and struggling, going back to the school bit of this, if we just move just in the name of efficiency in higher education or K through 12, we go in this direction, and we don't create paths for students to slow down, to stop, to think, to build communities among themselves and with others, then we're going to miss out and we're going to lose the essence of what it means to be human. And therefore, we can't even talk about human flourishing because, right, if we don't know what it means to be human, then there can be no human flourishing. There's only technological flourishing. Now, I don't mean to be like a doomsday kind of thing, because I think there's a lot of positive, beautiful things that we can do out of this. And technology as a tool, AI as a tool, I think can be powerful and it can help us solve problems. But I'd like us to go back to like the very first days of, and this is like the fourth time around we're talking about AI. AI is a long history of winters and springs kind of thing. But remember the first, in 2022, when ChatGPT kind of like burst on the scene, what is everybody talking about? We're talking about innovations in healthcare. We're going to eradicate cancer, right?
Yes.
We're going to do these things that we just could never do. And what are we doing now? We are writing a better email, right?
We're making Notify apps.
we're creating a lot more of this. We're doing vibe coding, which I guess can be helpful in certain things to cut down. And by the way, the benefits are not necessarily accruing on the people that are using them. It's actually on companies, right? I had this conversation with somebody in the field of journalism for our podcast, Age of AI podcast. And he said now journalists are being asked to write 10 times as many articles in a day. And so if you ask a journalist, are you actually seeing the benefits of AI? Are you working fewer hours? Are you getting paid more? The answer is no. So then who is then accruing all these benefits? Well, I guess it's the company, right? And so we're not seeing this kind of, the benefits of AI quite at a societal scale. We're only seeing the damage to the environment when it comes to, impact on water resources, energy, and everything else, because this data center is so energy intensive. And so and then of course, interstate competition, right?
Yes.
Where the United States and China are going to compete. There's going to be an arms race over who is going to control the future of AI development.
I think it's a lot to think about when we decide to engage with AI, in our families, with our children, with society, to really look at, like you said, are we getting the benefit? Are we willing to make that Faustian bargain with AI and reduce that friction and refriction in relationships, or do we take the scenic route? And I really hope that that's one of the messages that our parents will take away today, is to think about the scenic route and to join us as we work and fight for that for future generations. So I want you to just tell people where they can watch your podcast, where they can learn more about your work, and join in the efforts that you're engaging in.
Yeah, sure. So yes, I have a podcast as well. Been doing it since I think 21. It's called Age of AI. So yeah, you can find it on Spotify and all the other, iTunes, and it's on website. We've also launched two initiatives the last few months. One of them is the AI Ethics and Governance Institute. So this is a Utah-based policy think tank, but it's global. We have fellows across the world and various initiatives, but we have a working group that works on Utah issues to make sure that we can actually continue to make Utah kind of the leader in this space. And the other initiative is what we call organized intelligence, which actually tries to bring together faith-based communities and talk about the impact of AI on faith, but also what faith communities can and this moral architecture in a way, how they can impact this architecture of AI, broadly speaking. And so those are the three initiatives, and yeah, you can just look me up, Medlir Mema, and then you'll find all that information online.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Medlir, for joining us. And thank you for joining us on the Child First Policy podcast. And we'll see you next time.